Hi, and welcome to Lisa's Stamp Studio. I'm Lisa Curcio. Today, we're going to use embossing folders with vellum and acetate to make amazing techniques for cards. You are going to love these. I have 4 different samples and demonstrations for you, 2 with vellum and 2 with acetate. Now, you're not going to want to miss the free project sheet. That is linked for you down in the video description below. It's going to contain pictures of all the completed cards and all the supplies that I use, as well as the cutting dimensions for you, so that you can reproduce these samples at home. That's going to be available for you tonight when the premiere is over. Now, we love to interact with you during tonight's premiere. We are in the live chat with you right now. But in order for you to chat or even comment if you're watching the replay, YouTube does require that you log in using your Gmail address. So go ahead and do that now. With me in the live chat, you'll see that beautiful name in blue, Gina Curcio Holly. Gina is my daughter. She's also the sales and marketing director here at Lisa's Stamp Studio and an avid stamper. She's here with me to help interact with you, answer questions, provide links. We're here. We would love to chat with you. All right, we're ready. Let's get started. Our first card is going to use a 3D embossing folder. Now, I want to give you a couple tips about using these dynamic folders with vellum. I'm always going to recommend that you put either a scrap piece of cardstock behind it, place them together so that your vellum is completely covered. And then all you're going to do is you're going to slip them inside the embossing folder and we're going to run them through the embossing machine. Let's go ahead and open it. You're going to see that the vellum is here. The reason you're going to add the cardstock underneath is it's going to eliminate any cracking and ripping inside your vellum, because remember, this is a translucent thin paper. But like I said, you get a 2-for-1. So you've got a beautiful piece of white cardstock here. We're going to use both of these. The next thing I did was I die cut a large tag from the Greetings of the Seasons die set. I have it, of course, in vellum, and of course, I die cut a piece of scrap white paper behind it. We are going to emboss it again, but we're going to create the eclipse technique with the embossing folder. And for this, we're going to go back to this piece that we originally embossed here. What I want you to do is determine where you want your shape to be placed on the original card when it's done. So I want this one towards the center. Once I have a great idea of where it's going to go, we're going to open up that exact same embossing folder and we are going to mimic the design that we had originally used. So you can see here that I'm lining it up against the front of the embossing folder the very best that I can. And I can tell that the tag now needs to be here. As I'm going to flip this over, I'm going to remove the vellum and that leaves my tag in place. I'm going to use my favorite Post-it labeling and cover-up tape. And I'm going to tack this down inside the embossing folder so that it doesn't move. And now we're going to run this through the embossing machine one more time. I've just embossed it. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open it up and I'm going to carefully remove that tape. And I love this tape because I find that I can reuse it. I'm going to remove it carefully so I can also use that cardstock. You can leave it here or place it right on the handle of your die cutting machine. We're not going to use this piece today, but you can go ahead and save that for another project. That has now left us with this, and you can see that this is going to line up beautifully here. As pretty as this is, I thought it needed a little bit of sprucing up, and I want to teach you a fantastic technique. I'm going to be doing a little bit of ink blending on the vellum, and I'm going to work on the front side of this vellum. I'm going to be using pecan pie ink for this first layer. Now, I never like to put my brush right inside of the ink pad. I find it soaks up way more ink than I need and it's wasteful. And I don't want the ink to seep too far down on my bristles. Instead, what I like to do is I like to use a clear block. And I'm going to tap that right inside the ink pad to create a palette. I'm going to hold my blending brush and I'm going to swirl it on top of the clear mat. Now, I know it's loaded with ink pretty well. I just want to brush some of that off so I can control the coverage. And with a very light touch, I'm going to come over the tag and I'm going to blend some color. I'm very careful, too, to make sure that I'm getting some of that color down in the negative areas beyond the leaves. Now, we're going to do some building of color here as well. So you're not going to want to touch it while the ink is wet, otherwise you're going to leave a fingerprint in it. So I'm just going to go ahead and work more inside of those negative areas to fill them the best that I can or to my liking. I'm moving now to Cajun Craze. I've just cleaned the block off camera. I'm going to tap that inside this ink pad as well, and I've got a separate blending brush from that. I'm going to swirl that inside. Now, if you don't have a separate blending brush for each of the color families, you can clean these several ways. A drop of soap and some water until it runs completely clear. The bristles will become stained because of the pigmentation. Just make sure it's clean before you use it another color. My favorite way is to spritz rubbing alcohol on a paper towel and wipe it off until it runs clean. I'm going to go over now lightly on those leaves to add some added pigmentation and color. I'm going to turn it and keep my fingers as far off of that vellum in those wet areas as possible. This is going to give us a little bit of depth to those raised areas. Now you can do this with a dauber, but I find that the blending brush works better because the bristles are so small and fine and well separated. I'm going to be using Mossy Meadow next, and I'm going to use a separate block for this. Sometimes I find that when I do this blending on the vellum, I may want to come back and add more of a previous color. So I'm loading up my brush, making sure I can control the coverage because I don't want it to be too dark. And I'm going to turn this. I'm going to add a little bit of that mossy color now to my leaves for a realistic appearance. Reload the brush as often as you need, and then go ahead and add the color as you desire. I'm coming back to the Cajun Craze, and I'm going to add a little bit more pigmentation to those areas just to bring out that beautiful fall tone to this card. I'd like to keep a baby wipe nearby to make sure I have any excess ink off of my fingers because we don't want it to transfer to that beautiful piece that we're going to use here. Now we're going to need to attach the vellum pieces, and this is a question I get asked an awful lot is, how do you do that without the adhesive showing? And I'm going to give you the best tip. Use your silicone craft sheet, and you're going to need a wedge of sponge. Stampin' Up! No longer sells these, so I have them linked for you on my website under Shop, My Favorite Things, and then go to my craft room favorites. They come in a circle. I just cut them into wedges. It makes it a lot easier for me to hold them. When you're going to place liquid glue on them, unless they are stored in an airtight container, you're going to need to throw them away. And as inexpensive as they are, that's just what I do. But you can put these in an airtight container and then you can reuse them. I'm using the multi-purpose liquid glue, and I'm going to create a puddle up in the corner of my silicone craft sheet. I'm going to take the wedge of the sponge and I'm going to dab it inside there. I'm dissipating now the glue. I'm going to flip this over to what is the wrong side, and I'm dabbing glue around the outside perimeter right here on the silicone craft sheet. I find I don't need to cover the entire thing. I just want to make sure that I have the glue around the outside edges. Once that's finished, I am going to come back here and I am going to mimic the original pattern of the embossed image on the white cardstock the very best that I can. So these are aligned. I like to rub from the back to make sure I don't get any glue or ink on the front of that pretty white vellum. Now, as pretty as this is, there's another step that I can teach you in a technique. Now, it's not represented inside your project sheet, but I want to give you a little bit of a bonus. I'm going to work over that silicone craft sheet once again. That glue that was here, once it dries, you can simply rub it right off. I'm going to go ahead and use my water painter. Now, I just put tap water inside, but you can use filtered or distilled water if you like, especially if the water where you live has a lot of sediment in it. You're going to squeeze this. There's two areas that say here push until water runs through the bristles. You want this to be soaking wet on the tip. You're going to hold it against your opposite hand index finger and you are going to splatter. It's not going to look like much now, but what's going to happen as it begins to dry, you're going to begin to notice that the areas that had water on it are going to start to turn white, or the original color of the vellum. Now, there's really no rhyme or reason to how you can actually position it on here and get it strategically where you want it. But the other thing you can do is you can actually take the bristles and touch it right to the paper. Using those nice chiseled bristle tips can give you some fine little dot areas. Now, if you're like me and you're often impatient, I go ahead and I take a paper towel and I simply blot it. I don't want to rub to pick up too much of the ink, but you can see what's happened here. We've got some wonderful resist and fabulous texture to this embossed colored image. We're now going to add that to this layer, and to do so, you're going to do the exact same thing we've previously done. You're going to create a puddle right on top of your silicone craft sheet of some liquid glue. You're going to use that sponge and you're going to dissipate the glue and you're going to tap it around the edges of your image or your shape. And I am going to mimic once again the placement of this based on the embossing underneath. So the easiest way for me to do that is to look for the veins of this larger leaf and then just twist and turn a little bit until I've got it lined up the very best that I can. Now you'll notice that I didn't thread the tag, and I want to give you one more tip. I'm going to bring back my scratch paper, and I have a piece of white baker's twine. Now, if you're like me, you don't have the baker's twine in every color, don't worry. I'm going to use the residual ink that's here on the blending brush, and I'm just going to run this through the baker's twine. Now, you're going to go over this several times to get the consistency of the color that you want. I always cut the twine about an inch or so longer than what I'm going to need, so I have a nice clean area that I can hold on to. I am not concerned that it's perfectly solid because of the technique that we've done here. We're looking for that rustic age look. If you want it more solid or a stronger hue with no white of the baker's twine showing, go ahead and try a dauber. Now that that's been colored, we're simply going to make a bow. Now, if you're like me and your bows are all wonky, different sizes, let me give you another tip. Squeeze the knot in the center, and then I want you to adjust and pull on the loose ends to get the size that you want. Make sure you tighten it in the middle once you're finished. You can use liquid glue. I'll go ahead and I'll use a glue dot today just to kind of speed things up in the video. I'm going to actually place this inside the hole just to make my life easy because that knot is really, really small. And I'll go ahead and I'll attach that here. Now this is just the technique itself, but let me show you the finished card. Again, the placement of the vellum, how you emboss it, is going to determine where it's at. How much color you add is entirely up to you. The more predominant the colors, like this one, and of course the splatter, the more realistic and texture it's going to provide. In addition to that, I added some extra liquid glue to the back of that white layer, added it onto a piece of mossy meadow cardstock, added a simple embossed greeting from the coordinating stamp set, and some metallic sequins here to finish off this card. This is a beautiful way to use your vellum to create an eclipse image, to color the vellum, and to create that resist finish on top of the vellum once it's been colored. All right, let's move on to the next technique. Now, before you joined me, I went ahead and I used the Countryside Corners dies, and I die cut one of the sizes here. And just like we've done before, I placed my vellum on top of a piece of scrap cardstock so that it would give the dimension of the embossing folder some forgiveness so that it didn't rip my vellum. The embossing folder is called Layered Florals. It's also a 3D dynamic embossing folder, really, really pretty. But this time I want to teach you a different coloring technique, and we're going to use just the vellum. I'm going to place a piece of black cardstock underneath me so that you can see well. I have flipped this over, so we now have the debossed side where it's shallow here. You can use any coloring medium that you'd like, but I absolutely love to use alcohol-based markers for this. Remember, because of the translucency of this paper, the darker color that you are going to be using will look lighter when it's turned over. I've pulled out the Berry Burst Stampin' Blends markers here, and I've got both the light and the dark shade. They're sold in a combo. You can see that they're dual-ended. There's a smaller tip here and a brush tip here. You can choose whatever you'd like. I personally like the brush tip. I favor it. I like to use the lightest color first because I tend to be heavy-handed. I'm not going to color the whole thing because, of course, I have a finished card to share with you, but I want to show you how this works. I'm going to work within the perimeters of the embossed area. I'm trying my best not to touch the white embossed lines from the embossing folder, and that will make more sense when we flip it over. So go ahead and add your color where you want it. The great thing about this is you are able to allow that alcohol marker to evaporate, which literally takes seconds so that you can add more color. I'm going to use the dark Daffodil Delight to add color here to the center of my flower for the pollen area. I'm using the light Granny Apple Green here inside the leaves. So once it looks dry, you can go ahead and lay down your next shade. And now I'm going to work with the dark. So I'm going to come here towards the center where I would think the flower would have the darkest pigmentation. And I'm going to work my way out. I'm going to leave my center yellow as it is. It's so small, I don't see a reason to shade it. I'm going to come in with the dark Granny Apple Green, and I'm going to go right over those lines that were inside the embossing folder for some added emphasis. You're going to need to have some blending going on here just to make this look a little bit more realistic. So I'm coming back to the lightest shade, and I'm pulling the dark into the light. Now, how far up you pull is entirely up to you. And I'm going to do the exact same thing now with the light Granny Apple Green. As I said, we're not going to color the whole thing together, but I want to show you this image. Now, it doesn't look like much here on top of my hand, does it? But wait till you see this finished card. I created a 4¼ by 4¼ square card for a wedding. Now you can see on a very light colored cardstock, this is Bubble Bath. It's also the same color as some of the smaller flowers here, that it's really going to bring out the tones and the highlights. Isn't that beautiful? And again, so simple to do and very forgiving. Remember how I mentioned you want to try to avoid the outline of the embossing, because that leaves the white areas around the flower to give you better definition. I embossed a greeting, add some beautiful glimmer rhinestones here and some pretty ribbon. But on the inside of this card, I added a little interior area for the sentiment and a gift card holder. Now I know you're going to wonder how I made this, so I thought I would show you. I used the Pocket Thoughts dies, and these are fantastic because you don't have to do any of the cutting and scoring yourself. I used the Bold and Beautiful Designer Series paper, and I die cut 2 from the medium size, and I actually die cut them at the same time. Remember, designer paper is thinner than cardstock, so this was easy to do. Not only does it die cut it for you, but it also creates all the score lines. So all you have to do is go over and crease on all of those lines. As always, I love to go over it with my bone folder to reinforce those score areas. Now in the second one, which is going to be the back side, we don't need the flaps. Now you can go ahead and use your scissors, or in my case, I'm going to use the Stampin' Trimmer. So I'm going to line up that score line right inside the area here where I know the blade is going to travel, and I'm going to cut them off on all 3 sides. That has now left us with this. All you're going to do is you're going to turn this one upside down, and we are going to add liquid glue to those little tiny flaps, or you can use adhesive, whichever you prefer. I'm using my precision glue press because the glue comes out nice and small and I can get inside those areas, and it really is wonderful for my arthritic hands. I'm going to turn those flaps in. I'm going to turn the bottom one down, and all I'm going to do is sandwich these together, and that's going to create that adorable little pocket. The multi-purpose liquid glue that I use inside the glue press is this one. It's very, very strong, and it dries very, very quickly, which is one reason I love it. You do get 2 different size tips when you purchase the precision glue press. This is the narrowest of the 2. And the reason I love it so much is because the tip on this is very large and the glue flows out too quickly for me. In addition to that, it's very hard for me to squeeze because of my basal joint arthritis. It's very small, as you can see. It fits in the palm of my hand, and it literally needs a tiny trigger. Just watch. Tiny little squeeze is going to get glue out. And once you do, you can see how little I have to press to get tiny dots of glue. It rests inside the cradle, and that pink plunger down inside is going to make sure that you have a virtually airtight seal so that it does not clog. When you're ready to put it away at the end of the day, this decorative needle cap will go right on the end for storage. You'll find the Precision Glue Press linked for you on my website under Shop, My Favorite Things, and then click on Craft Room Favorites and scroll down. Once the pocket is all dry, you can see that there's plenty of room to put your gift card in, which is what I've done here. And in this case, I'm going to hand deliver this card at a wedding we're going to be attending. So I'll just place it down inside my card. All right, let's work on some acetate embossing folder techniques. I'm using a small square of acetate. Now, with Stampin' Up, they're called window sheets, and I am going to emboss the acetate. The embossing folder I chose was the Island 3D embossing folder. Keep in mind, you can use any embossing folder that you like. I prefer 3D folders for this technique. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to place that down inside the embossing folder. We're going to close that up and run that through the embossing machine. When we open the folder, we have this beautifully embossed piece. Now you might be wondering why I'm working with a small piece, because I have a specific card layout and a technique I want to teach you on how to work on the embossed acetate. You'll want to work on a protected work surface, and I'm using a tiny piece of tissue paper. You're going to want to cut this about 1/4 to 1/2 inch bigger than the acetate. That's going to make it easier for you to trim down. But we're going to create some beautiful color on here. If you do not have colored tissue paper, don't worry. You can just use white and add color. For this technique, you're going to use a sponge dauber. Now, just like the blending brushes, if you don't have one dedicated to each color like I do, no problem. Clean them with a drop of soap and water until they run clear. They will be stained because of the pigmentation, but as long as it runs clear, you're good to go. Crushed curry ink is here. We are going to load the dauber with ink. Unlike the blending brushes, I don't have to use a palette, but I'm going to give you an important tip. A lot of us gravitate to the center of the ink pad when we're using our stamps. So when you load your blending brushes, work inside the corner. There's a very high concentration of ink around those corners because we don't typically navigate there. Once you've added your ink, go ahead and I want you to pull the color onto the tissue paper. And I am going to pull sideways because I don't want to rip the paper. I'm going to blend about half of this in the crushed curry ink. We're going to move on now to pumpkin pie. We're going to open this up and we're going to do the exact same thing. What I want you to do is to turn the project to make it easier for your hand. I do want you to overlap some of that previous color. Picking up the color from the corner of your ink pad where there's a lot of ink sitting there waiting for you to use it. And then just blend these two areas together. I'm going to fill most of this up to my fingers using the sponge dauber. And then finally, we're going to use a Cajun Craze ink. This time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate the paper so I can place my hands here on the other side. We're going to ink this up and we're going to bring the color all the way to the edge. Make sure that you're overlapping the previous color some so that the colors are going to blend together. If you're having a hard time keeping the tissue paper from ripping, remember that you can daub on the color as well. I'm going to turn this back around. No two of these are ever going to look the same. Please keep in mind that you're going to want to work on colors that work well together. So if you were to lay yellow and then blue next to it, you're going to end up with a green in the center, which could be very, very pretty. So use hues of the same color or experiment when you're mixing tones. Because we know that the acetate is a little bit smaller, we're going to want to keep that in mind for the next step, which is going to be to tear this. So I'm going to leave a little space here where my thumb is, and I'm going to start down here, and I am going to tear on an angle, leaving some of that yellow, if I can, towards the bottom. Now save that piece. I have my silicone craft sheet here once again, and I'm going to add a little corner of glue here. I'm going to lay the tissue paper down on top of here, brace the tissue paper, and then you're going to dab around the edges. I'm going to hold in the center where I know that it's dry and free of glue. Once you have that ready, you are going to adhere this now to the back side of the embossed acetate. So the bumping ends are up. Once that's finished, I want you to go ahead and move it from the silicone craft sheet. I'm going to place it here and I'm going to press to make sure we've got good adhesion here of that tissue paper. This is going to dry very, very quickly because, as I said, that glue is very strong. I keep a pair of scissors here in the studio dedicated just for those sticky projects, and I'm going to use that acetate as a guide, and I'm simply going to cut off the excess of what I don't need. Now, before you join me, I made one that was slightly smaller, and these sizes are all inside your project sheet for you. Let's go ahead and show you how this is going to come together on a card. Now, before you join me, I created a second one that is slightly smaller. And the very first thing we're going to do before we put this card together is connect them. So I am going to use a glue dot. I'm revealing one of those here, and I'm going to use my Take Your Pick tool. You're going to want to put it down here in the corner on the front of the acetate so that you don't rip the tissue paper. And then we're just going to overlap these squares as you desire and then press. We're going to flip them over, and now we're going to use our dimensionals. I'm going to place one in each of the areas I know it's not going to show. Do you see here? I have to be very careful. So I'm going to place another here where I know it's going to be hidden, another here because you want to balance this. The acetate has a natural tendency to want to curl because of the embossing. Now in that small area, I'm going to come over to a mini dimensional. I'm going to place that down here, and I am going to want to brace that in that other section to make sure we have as much of this sticking down as possible. Once those have been placed on, I'm going to brace the acetate and I am going to remove the backings to my dimensionals. Before you joined me, I embossed a greeting from the Changing Leaves stamp set. Now I'm going to show you this whole bundle because we have used it quite a bit already today. These are the coordinating dies, and you're going to notice that it's also a hybrid bundle, which means you can include the Changing Leaves embossing folder, and this is the one we previously used. So these are the products I'm using on this card. I'm going to take this and I am going to adhere this above the greeting, creating that asymmetrical look. The dimensionals are well hidden now behind the colored tissue paper. I used the Changing Leaves dies here, and I die cut a piece from gold foil. Isn't that beautiful? And we're going to add this now to here. Personally, I love the precision glue press because you can see how tiny I can get the dots out. I can make sure that I'm not going to get it on the front of the foil as well. Once my glue has been placed on, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to tack this down over those pieces, position them where I want them, and hold them in place for a few seconds. Remember that the acetate now is bumpy, so you want to make sure that the back of what you're adhering here comes into contact with it. One of my favorite tips is to take one of your clear blocks and place it right over the top until it dries. I absolutely love these iridescent foil gems. They already have glue dots on the back, which make them easy to use. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to pick a couple of these up, and I'm going to draw our eye all over the card. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I put 2 down here and then 1 up in the corner. Odd numbers are always more appealing. This is our first embossed acetate sample with a really fun technique using tissue paper and some ink. Now I'm ready to teach you another acetate and embossing folder technique. I'm going to lay some black cardstock on top of my silicone craft sheet to make it easier for you to see the acetate. Now I know there is a glare from the studio lights. I'll do my very best to pick it up. Before you've joined me, I went ahead and I punched or die cut various size circles. The smallest ones are 3/8 of an inch, then a 1/2 inch, and then 3/4 of an inch. I'm using the Nature's Sweetness Designer Series paper and some gold foil. Keep in mind you can use any papers and any foils, glimmer papers, whatever you'd like. This is a double technique on this piece of acetate. I'm going to be using my Take Your Pick tool to help me position the pieces. I'm going to start with one of my larger circles, and I'm going to flip it upside down, and I'm going to use my precision glue press to put some glue on the back, and I'm going to go ahead and add that to the top of the acetate. You're going to notice that I have some of it hanging over onto the cardstock here. I want to make sure that you know that I want you to work beyond the perimeter so that the glue doesn't stick to the black cardstock. I'm going to move here now to the silicone craft sheet. I'm now using my little tiny tweezers to help me with these smaller circles. What I want you to do is I want you to come up with a very random pattern. Again, you're going to see that I'm working beyond the perimeter of the acetate here at the top. I'm going to continue to take my circles and add my glue and adhere them randomly across the upper 2/3 of the acetate. You don't need to be too concerned about getting glue over the entire circle. I want to make sure that they are just tacked in place because the security of the circles is going to come in the next step. The next step is to pick your favorite embossing folder. I'm using the Distressed Tile 3D embossing folder. Again, a nice thick folder. I'm going to place the whole thing down inside. Make sure that the glue on those pieces that are extending past the acetate are good and dry. We're going to go ahead and run this through the embossing machine. Now that this has been embossed, you're going to be able to see that we actually have a beautiful embedded embossed image inside the acetate, as well as over the foil pieces and the designer series paper. The texture, the way it feels, the way it looks is so interesting. But let's talk about adhering it. You're going to choose a piece of designer series paper or cardstock of your choice that's going to go underneath it. What you're going to do next is you're going to flip this upside down, and we are going to add dimensionals where they will not show. So I'm going to use both my full size and my minis. I'm placing the full size dimensionals on the back side of each of the larger circles. I'm now using the mini dimensionals to work behind the smallest circles. In an area where the circle overlaps the outside of the acetate, just cover the entire back of the circle. Once you've applied all the dimensionals, all you have to do now is remove the paper backings. This now will get mirrored over the top of the designer series paper or cardstock. My tip for you is to start at the bottom where there are no circles and align the outside corners and the edges, and then press your way to the top. Because we have the silicone craft sheet underneath us, any exposed dimensionals will not stick. This leaves you ample room for a greeting. Once you have it all adhered, you're going to go ahead and add adhesive or glue to the back side and add it to the front of your card. I added a piece of coordinating designer series paper, or you can use cardstock. I rimmed it with a little bit of gold foil to bring in that coordination. I used the Wanted to Say dies to create the word celebrate. Absolutely love the texture, and you see how the images float on the acetate because the dimension is behind it. This is called embedded embossing floating image. Recapping what we made today, we have acetate, embedded embossing with a floating image. We have embedded embossing with tissue paper colored layers. We have embedded vellum with a coloring technique. And we also created this one in the beginning. This is the eclipse with an embossing folder used on vellum. Pop down right now in the comments and tell me which one you favor and what you're going to create your card for. As always, knowing your favorite always helps me when I'm designing new projects. So go ahead and pop down right now in the comment below and tell me which of those techniques is your favorite. Will you use vellum or will you use acetate? I would love to know. Now, there's a lot going on here at the studio, and I would love to keep you informed. July is bonus days month with Stampin' Up! For every $50 increment in product that you purchase before sales tax and shipping, they're going to give you a $5 coupon code to use in August. It's an amazing deal, and now is a great time because guess what? All those brand new online exclusives are here. Those products are available while supplies last, so I'm going to encourage you to shop early for the best selections. And if you love fresh ideas, I have you covered with Stamp Studio memberships. I design exclusive project ideas every single week that come right to your inbox. There are 2 levels. Level 1 is $5 for the whole month, and you'll get a new tutorial every single Monday. That'll include pictures, cutting dimensions, supplies, and step-by-step instructions. Best part of all, regardless of what level that you purchase, you're going to be able to enjoy these photos and tutorials with no watermarks, which means if you are a Stampin' Up! Demonstrator or perhaps you teach classes for other people, you're going to be able to use the tutorials and the project ideas. It does not matter what country you live in, we are able to cater to everyone. Level 2 includes everything in Level 1, but also a monthly fun fold card. In addition to that, you'll get a discount in my PDF tutorial library. And in addition, there is random product prize patrol for everybody in Level 2. You'll find all the information over on my website. Just click memberships in the red menu bar. While you're over on my website, scroll all the way to the bottom and fill out that little form so that I can keep you in the know and inspire. That'll add you to my free weekly e-newsletter. While you're there, look around on my website. There's tons more ideas for you. If you have enjoyed tonight's video, do me a favor, click that thumbs up here on YouTube, which is a like. It helps me tons with YouTube. And if you're new and you haven't subscribed, I would love to have you subscribe. Click the bell icon and the word all so that YouTube will send you notifications when I provide new content here so that you don't miss anything. I am so glad that you were here with me tonight. I look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great day.